But of course, earlier this week, we discussed how the ABC board was set to meet with the Prime Minister with reports that Chairman Ida Buttrose was hoping to increase the media company's current funding level above the $1 billion per annum that they receive from taxpayers. Now, because they're taxpayer funded, I thought, forget the PM, how about we ask the people out there, the taxpayers, ordinary Australian taxpayers who actually employ the ABC, if they think it should receive more money, and even if they watch or listen to it in the first place. And here's what you had to say.
It's hard to put into perspective, isn't it? But look, you know, any organisation has got to have continued growth in its funding if it's got to keep ahead of the times. If it's not, it's standing still.
Why do they need more than $1 billion? I believe because it's our station, they should get what they need. Not necessarily what they want, but what they need.
Everybody needs more money.
I don't think so, not at this stage, yeah. I think they need to improve their programming, their overall presentation, and then if they lift their game and stop repeated programs, get us some new programs, then I think, yes, it would be worthwhile investing more money. But I think with the funding they've got, they should be producing better programs.
So if they're asking for more, I'd be interested to know in what capacity that they're going to be using that funding and what particular programs that they're going to be expanding to.
Absolutely, yeah, I think so. Don't you?
Well, it depends on what they're going to be using it for.
Radio 2GB broadcaster Luke Grant joins me now from Sydney. Luke, I tell you, with the ABC, it's very interesting. $1 billion is a lot of money. You work inside a big media organisation. We're on a smell of an oily rag here. I couldn't possibly imagine what you could spend $1 billion on. But of course, everyone there were focusing on the value that they, as consumers of the ABC, are getting. You know, a lot of them were saying no program repeats and you know, a better product. But of course, that's not where the money goes. The money goes to fat cat salaries, basically for inner city types in the Ultimo head office.
And you know what? Maybe it's time to revisit what is it meant to do? What is it there for? Is it there to provide all that it's doing now, plus this new large online presence where it kind of takes on the major publishers like News Corp, like Nine Media, where I work, and other smaller publications? Is that what we expected it to do? Is it one television station, or is it a regular TV station that produces the general fodder, then one for kids, and then one for teens? Is it a radio station that focuses on the local area, delivering local news, which I have to say the commercial radio has probably dropped the ball a little in that area, and that might just be a reflection of the commercial reality, that there's just not that much money in those places to keep a commercial broadcasting station happening. But should it be a local station, a national station that, you know, feeds your parliament, maybe a sports station that covers all those great sports that we compete in, but don't really have the commercial interest? But should there be, Peta, a jazz station? Should there be a country music station? And you could go on. I think it's a very good time to say, right, what do we want this thing to be? If you want to listen to jazz music, you can get Spotify for, I think, nothing, or Apple Music, if you're prepared to listen to the ads. There's your jazz station taken care of. I think if we're going to talk about the ABC, we should talk about focused, local broadcasting, news coverage, current affairs, national interest sporting, and the rest of the stuff. We don't need a big online ABC. We don't need all these little fringe stations. Nice to have, but at the end of the day, you talked about the media organisation I work for. I think I've been in the media now about 30 years. I can't think of one year in my 30 where via management or a board report, or there hasn't been an effort to reduce costs. Welcome to the real world. You say it happens here, of course it happens here. Happens at my place. It seemingly doesn't happen at the ABC, where if you don't rate or you spend a bit too much money, you just go back to the taxpayer. Doesn't happen at my place.
Let me just jump in there, because if you remember, after Tony Abbott was elected, there was all these criticisms that the Abbott government had cut funding to the ABC. What it had actually done was, for the first time in a long time, included the ABC because it is a taxpayer department, basically.
Yep.
It is a taxpayer entity.
Yeah.
Included in the efficiency dividend that every other government entity had to cough up. You know, money reductions every year, asking them to be more efficient in the way they spend their money on behalf of the taxpayer. Now, I agree with your sentiment there that all of those things, what I would call the core business of the ABC, which is radio, which is television, which is localism, which is news and current affair, and I don't mind them being tough politically. That's their job, and you wear it if you're in politics. I think that's their core business. But all the peripheral stuff, all the nasty comedy that really is just political barbs, and it's all very partisan. I think that's got no place on the ABC, and I think that they drastically need to reduce the headcount in their back end and head office, and they need to enforce some of those senior executives to get out of Sydney and to live in the regions. And if it reorientated itself, you'd have some natural resignations there, because these people live in a bubble. They live in an Ultimo bubble, just like the Prime Minister talks about a Canberra bubble. But I don't know. You know, I worked for Richard Alston way back in the late 90s, early 2000s, with lots of debates then about the cultural tone of the ABC, Luke. I haven't seen a government in the last 20 years of any persuasion or a minister prepared to stand up to the ABC. And I don't know any other organisation funded by the taxpayer to the tune of $1 billion a year that isn't reviewed, that we don't sit back and say after 10 years, do we need to do this anymore, or should we still do it this way? Nothing else avoids scrutiny like the ABC.
And of course, if you start even to talk about that, you've got Save Our ABC, you've got this giant cheer squad. I'll give you a great example of what you just said reinforced, Peter. Through the week, there was a piece written about the ABC and the funding. A coalition senator made the point that, you know, we should look closely at the funding, perhaps even cut it. Whoa, scary thought. But she said, you know, why would you move from Ultimo to, say, the western suburbs? Here's an idea, because that's where the people are. Her argument was, who are you going to get to turn up to the television station or the radio station if you move it from Ultimo? I couldn't believe it. And then one of the other points put forward was this, that in the last 12 months, I think there's been something like 900 emergencies. And they might be fire emergencies or flood emergencies, or it could be anything. And the year before there was 300. And the argument was, there's going to be even more emergencies now because of climate change, so we've got to fund more because they're our emergency broadcaster. And if the first part of the story didn't knock me over, that did. Because I, like plenty of people at this network, I remember turning up on a Saturday during the recent fire crisis when I worked in Newcastle, when the Pasha Bulker arrived on Nobby's Beach. We got rostered into work just because it was the right thing to do, to keep, and there were floods and storms, to keep people informed. It's what you do. Absolutely. You're part of that community.
It's the bread and butter. It's the bread and butter. And look, if the ABC thinks that there isn't enough funding for its emergency service broadcast, and I do commend the work the
I
ABC
agree
does
with
in this
you. Good
area.
work.
It's got local reporters on the ground, which I think is critically important, and that's not anything to do with the Ultimo crowd. Well, then they should cut the waste and the duplication out in other areas and refocus their money. This is what everybody else does. Every other large government entity, office, department, whatever, prioritises their spending, because in the end it comes from the taxpayer. And so few taxpayers consume the ABC, yet they have to pay for it. So I think the ABC is beholden to be as efficient as it possibly can. I want to move on to another subject, though, because Christopher Pyne, he was flushed out today. Now, he's a former Defence Minister, which everybody knows. He's the bloke that got the submarines to Adelaide at great expense to the taxpayer. There's a lot of concern, despite the promises that the content in these submarines would be upwards of 90% Australian firms, which means the dollars, the profit and the jobs stay here. It's now, they say, down to 50%. Well, Pyne says this has nothing to do with me, and the government's got to get tough with the French contractors. But hang on, this is the bloke that sat across the contracts. The contracts must be deficient. He can't blame his his successor. No,
and I think Richard Marles, the Deputy Labor leader, makes a great point. Why didn't you put that in the contract? Now, this group, this part French-owned group, I think it's called Royal Navy, they say, oh, we've come to Australia and we didn't realise that, you know, they were so far with respect, so far behind where we needed them to be. So as a result, we've got to use overseas organisations. And I think much of the money so far has been expended on international organisations with a branch office here. But you're right about Christopher Pyne. He's seeing this big deal that might have saved his seat. I don't know exactly, but certainly wouldn't have hurt his chances. He's now out there saying, come on, government, get... But he was there. He saw the bloke with a pen in his hand. He said, oh, look, before you sign that, any chance we could have a chat? And you've done this, Peter, in your previous roles. Wouldn't you, if you wanted to make sure that there was money injected into our economy, wouldn't you somewhere in the paperwork just make sure that there was a little fail-safe that said, you know, one day you knock on the door, hey, mate, we've got to up this. Remember, we had a deal here. I mean, it's just bizarre.
I mean, I think my problem broadly with the submarines is we should be getting and paying for the best submarines at the fairest price, not necessarily the cheapest price, but the fairest price. And if they are completely foreign builds, well, then they are coffins for sailors, or submariners, if we put them in and they're not fit for purpose. So I don't think they need to be built in Australia. I think they need to be the best subs, and fingers crossed they end up being built in Australia. But the priority is that they've got to be the most effective, the most stealth-like, fit for purpose, as I said, the conventional sort of footprint we want them to go. But this became a giant pork barrelling exercise, and I find it offensive. I find it offensive to say that as a former coalition staffer, and now Pyne's trying to blame everybody else, and I think people can see it absolutely for what it is. Just on the sports rorts issue too, you know, the Auditor General saying there were a whole lot of programs he would class as outside the rules. And the Prime Minister was saying, well, no one was ineligible. The Auditor General saying in hearings overnight, well, there are, and it's about 40%. But what he terms ineligible are late applications, which I would say maybe outside the guidelines, but I wouldn't class them as ineligible myself. But that's been seized upon by Labor. How damaging is this for the government, or will punters say, look, you know, the minister's gone, move on? Do you think it's still got legs?
I'm not sure. It depends. One of the points you've made this week is with the, you know, looking at the belly button within Canberra, how much time has the government actually spent spruiking their credentials? They made a point last week in Question Time that when Albo was a minister, there was a grants program he administered, and there were cases where people got money that weren't eligible. I note in this story today that the subscript is essentially they weren't eligible at the time. Whether or not that means that they were never eligible, I don't really know. But they got Bridget McKenzie, they embarrassed the government for a week. I think we know that what happened was very much pro the coalition. The money went in there to their benefit. I think we accept that. I think we generally accept that normally happens, that, you know, it's never going to be 50-50. The funny thing here is, I think if you believe what Bridget McKenzie said, the Labor electorate's actually got more than what they would have got. It's there, it's a nasty smell, but I don't think it's going to occupy front of mind for many people, to be honest, in my view.
Yeah, we'll leave it there. Luke Grant, as always, thanks very much
for your
analysis
to see you, Peter,
on this Valentine's Day. Mwah! To you too.
And to you.